So, Sam Faddis, welcome back to the broadcast. Starmer in the UK is being demanded by his party now for him to step down. How is it that they go so overboard, not understanding that we've had immigration and assimilations for centuries now, and people assimilate, and it's not fragmented. They respect the rule of law. They respect the identity of that nation. And it doesn't mean that they have to lose their culture where they're coming from, but they have to assimilate into another culture, and they have to respect the rule of law. What do you think will be his outcome?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they've gone over the edge and they're going to pay the price, and you're going to see that. And what do I mean by over the edge? I mean, look, we certainly have had our share of difficulties in the course of the history of this country with assimilating different types of people and cultures and languages and religions and figuring out how to go forward with all of that. But we have had the advantage. I mean, and it's difficult. I don't mean to blow by that. Those difficulties have not been minor, right? Sometimes they have been massive. And on at least one occasion, we ended up in a civil war trying to figure out what we were going to be as a nation. But the thing is, as a country, we were not an ethnicity, a particular people from a particular area. We were from the beginning an amalgam. I mean, when my people came here, my dad's people, who were Scots, they weren't regarded as other white people by English folks. They lived in their own townships because they spoke funny and did all kinds of weird stuff. So anyway, the point is, we have had this history. We have had to figure this out over the centuries. The Brits, not so much, right? The Brits have, I mean, okay, if you go back far enough, you're going to find invasions and so forth. But basically, you've been dealing with the English, and they don't have a history of doing this. And I think they lost the bubble here in terms of not understanding how difficult a process it is and the dangers if you do it wrong.
You know, Taiwan continues to push back aggressively against China. You know, while the United States discusses whether or not they will increase military support, at what point does deterrence become provocation?
Well, in terms of us supporting the Taiwanese.
It seems as though that Trump sort of signaled that he has to rethink this. I don't know whether it has to do with China has decided to get involved to ask Iran to step back. I noticed the president extended his negotiations because he was threatened again. I noticed that Israel has extended its sort of peace agreement with Hezbollah for another 45 days. Does this all culminate as a result of his meeting with Xi?
Well, I'm afraid, the worst case, and I'm certainly afraid that that's the case, yeah, that we're seeing a little bit of a softening of our position on Taiwan because we think we're going to get something out of the Chinese for it. That is clearly the danger. I strongly suggest we don't go down that road. I mean, let's just start with this. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. Taiwan is not historically a part of Han China. That is not true. Did they under a dynasty occupy Taiwan for a long period of time? Yeah, so did the Japanese, right? So did the Brits and the French and the Germans occupy big chunks of Africa for long periods of time. That doesn't mean that those parts of Africa should now be recognized as historically French. I mean, and the Chinese played this card already with Tibet. They announced that Tibet was also never a part of China, an independent kingdom, an independent culture, independent religion. They announced they were part of China and went in and brutal invasion and destroyed monasteries and killed over 1 million people. So we've seen this movie before.
Well, let me stop you again.
Yeah.
Do you think that Taiwan could become this generation's Sarajevo?
Yeah, I mean, look,
I mean, bringing all kind
Chi-
of regional powers around the world into this conflict, because it has that kind of explosive potential. Remember
100%.
Sarajevo? Many people may not remember it.
Right, and your reference, I presume, is to 1914 and how
Yes,
World War One
that's
kicked off.
exactly right.
Right. Okay, so you get an archduke that hardly anybody remembers assassinated, and the next thing you know, all of Europe is in a war, killing millions of people for years. Yeah, but the 100%. But the way you avoid that is through clarity, right? That the way you avoid that is through making sure that the Chinese understand you don't want to do this, and it's not going to turn out well for you. It is the ambiguity and the misreading of cues that leads us down the path to war. I mean, Taiwan is not historically a part of mainland China. So what the Chinese are serving notice of is that they plan to absorb an independent country. This is no different than the Russians announcing they were going to absorb Germany or some other country during World War II.
You know,
And
you
we
know,
ought to,
you know, our Western leaders, Sam, underestimating how closely China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are increasingly coordinating strategically?
yes, they are. And we continue to talk in terms where we beat around the bush and we don't want to just address things directly. Look, the Chinese, and obviously, I'm not talking about the Chinese people, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party. Not our friends.
No.
And they don't want to coexist. They don't want to get along. They want to dominate the planet, and they want to subordinate us. And the party is a ruthless, brutal thing, a thuggish enterprise that runs slave labor camps and does organ harvesting and every other nasty thing in the world. We should have never climbed in bed with these guys economically decades ago, and we ought to be heading the other direction, not playing games with them. And yeah, there's a real danger that they're going to jump and say, we think we can take Taiwan now.
You know, some would say, I was asked the question, has the modern information war become more powerful than conventional military force itself?
Well, I don't know that I would go that far, but it has become one heck of a lot more than a sideshow, right? I mean, look right now. Right now, one of the things the Iranians are betting on is that they can hold out longer than we can, and in terms of this conflict. And a big part of that is a question of our domestic political situation. They're looking at the impending midterms and the political reality in the United States, and they got smart analysts working for them, and they're telling them Trump can't hold this course. He's got to get out of this before the midterms. Okay, so that political calculus is 100% being shaped by what people see on the internet every day, right? What are they reading on the internet? What do they see on the news? Do they think we're winning? Do they think we're and I think you see that with the administration officials. Clearly, they come out and keep feeling like they have to give good news even where they can't back it up because they're so worried about those opinion polls.
You know, in your fog of war assessment, are we entering a period of controlled tension between superpower, or Sam, are we actually sleepwalking toward more miscalculation?
Well, my fear is that we're option B, that we're sleepwalking into this, that we, you know, we just had a summit where the leader of communist China began the entire thing by warning the president of the United States, saying, let's not repeat the same mistake that the Athenians and the Spartans made in the Peloponnesian War, which was, 2,500 years ago, whatever. Okay, in that analogy, Xi, I don't think really understands his Greek history very clearly, but the point is, from his perspective, we're the Athenians. We're the ones who got obliterated and subjugated by the other power. That his reference is clearly saying, don't stumble into this because you won't like the result. Figure out a way to avoid that result, because otherwise we're going to be the ones dictating terms to you. That's pretty dramatic when you have a summit and the very first words out of the mouth of the Chinese leader are watch yourself, what that boils down to. And then he goes on from that in the summit to talk in very stark terms about Taiwan and how if you don't take the right moves, this will end very, very badly. So I don't know what more you need in the way of a warning. I've said before, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, whatever we call him now, should have gotten on a plane at that moment and flown back to the Pentagon and turned on the red lights and said, guys, this might be happening a heck of a lot sooner than we thought.
You know, finally, where are we now in the fog of war?
With Iran?
Yes.
We haven't moved an inch in weeks. We keep waiting for the part where the Iranians are going to quit, and the Iranians aren't anywhere close to quitting. They can hold out, in my estimation, for months, not weeks. Months at a minimum, and they're betting they can hold out longer than we can. So unless we're prepared to just quit and go home with our tails between our legs, which, I mean, you know, I didn't support this war from the beginning, but once you start it, you better win it. So I don't advocate going home and quitting. If we want to win this thing, we really need to increase the pressure on the Iranians. They are not anywhere close to giving us the terms.
Sam Faddis, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on. When we return, Industrial Bank will join us to talk about how they are rehabilitating people who are returning from prison, returning to everyday life. It's a fascinating story, what this bank is doing, and we're going to discuss it when we return on Your Voice and Your Future.
Industrial banking care about incarcerated people that's trying to get a second chance at life.
It's good to be reminded that there is something that you can build towards on your way out.
We are beyond banking now, and we are reaching communities that are very critical and an integral part of how we collectively can move forward.
There are people out here that's considering them and that believe in them, that they can make different choices.
You know, I have so much respect for Industrial Bank. My experience has just been absolutely the best, and what Doyle Mitchell and his family have been able to build in these communities, not just in Washington, D.C., but many other places, is just anything short of remarkable. So it's a real pleasure to have you join us today to talk about something I think is just absolutely remarkable. And you're here with your Senior Vice President, Jacquie and Boles. Ms. Boles, welcome back. I've also had a long relationship with you, and thank you so much for joining us. You know, I'm so fascinated why Industrial Bank decided to become involved in the rehabilitation and reentry rather than simply traditional banking.
Absolutely. First of all, Armstrong, thank you for having us on to your show tonight to address this very important topic. I'm going to let Jacquie answer that question because she is one of the founders of the G program.
Yeah, you know, so it really was happenstance. Myself and another colleague were volunteering with another organization on our own time on Saturdays, going up to Baltimore jail, working with male children charged as adults. And we did that for several months, and soon after, the D.C. Department of Corrections heard about it, and they contacted us, and on behalf of the bank, we started to provide financial literacy inside of the D.C. jail.
How long ago did you start this?
This was 2016.
2016.
2016.
Oh, so 11 years.
Yes.
No, 10 years.
Yes.
What's your metrics? How do you measure the success of this?
So, you know, to be honest, it's really about the hard work, right? So the impact is beyond the numbers. We do track the number of participants in our classes and our sessions. We have graduation ceremonies where those individuals...
But you must have a metric for success.
To be honest, it's really about impact.
Impact.
It's really about impact, and yeah.
You know, I would say one of the metrics for success is the amount of contact that we have with former residents that come back to the bank. that keep in touch with us. We haven't started measuring recidivism for those that we have taught, but another metric is we have people that have opened bank accounts that stay in touch with us, and that way we know that they're building their lives outside of the justice system.
You know, this is a time where many institutions avoid risk. Why do you believe giving someone a second chance is a critical investment?
It's a very critical investment. The loyalty that we create, the hope that we build, the trust that we establish, and the fact that we're not only giving them information, we're providing them with a unique resource, such as a savings account. There's no risk with savings accounts. They deposit the money into the accounts. Every once in a while they withdraw. There is no risk.
So beyond your institution and how it will benefit you, the overall coming back in the community, adjusting, being accepted, having real skills, finding real employment or creating employment, what has that been for the people over the last 10 years?
I think it's been tremendous. It's been priceless. I think what we do is we give them confidence, we give them knowledge. With knowledge comes confidence, things that are practical for them, how to save money, how to spend money or not spend money. And I think when they have these principles that they've never been taught, they come back with a level of confidence in their community where they can be productive and they can make better decisions.
You know, obviously, coming out of prison, there is an emotional damage. There's a readjustment. There's insecurity. There's this stigma. How do you help that person transform to find their own self-worth and the dignity to feel that they belong again?
The fact that we show up, number one. The fact that we show up, we're consistent, we do the hard work, and we actually partner with other organizations. No one organization can do it by themselves. A bank can't do it by themselves because, like you said, it's beyond just the financial literacy, right? It's really the human, right? Helping them to get their ID, helping them to find a job, helping them to save money. So we are just one aspect of a very powerful and critical ecosystem that is centered around a singular goal.
You know, I know a little about mentoring, and I know whether it's reentry success, whether it's any kind of success, it has more to do in the end with the mindset versus the resources that you provide. Talk about that.
Well, it is a matter of your mindset, but remember, a lot of these individuals have a certain mindset when they go in, and as they stay in, and so we are interrupters of their mindsets in a certain way, because one, we care about them, we love them, we feed them, you know, when they graduate, and it lets them know that there are people that make a difference in this world, people that they don't really would even consider caring about them. And so that begins to change their mindset. We tell them how much they're worth to themselves, how much they're worth to their families, and then we give them knowledge about finances, and it begins to change their mindsets. Just giving them a certificate and clapping for them, you know, changes their lives about, wow, no one ever clapped for me when they called my name. So, you know, we do what we think are very simple things, but to many of these individuals, it's huge.
You know, Ms. Boyle, there is no question from my experience that teaching someone financial literacy can only reduce recidivism. I mean, because so much of why people end up in prison is around finances.
That's correct. Absolutely, absolutely. But they have to have a different relationship with their money, right?
And what is that different relationship?
The different
morality, moral clarity, character,
all of those things,
legality,
all of those things, but also too, we offer them the same products and services with the same interest rates that you or I would receive. So they're taking money from a commissary that many of them that have been in jail for decades have saved thousands. There's a lot of money behind the wall, and we give them a different option, and they see how their money grows. They see the interest that compounds. And so we're providing them that resource that restores a different type of dignity and the lessons that we teach. We teach them the importance of maintaining credit. Cash is not king. Credit, you need to have credit. So we teach them the principles and why they're important and how they touch their individual lives. And they're not only responsible for themselves, but the majority of the individuals that we work with are men, and we still really emphasize the fact that they're leaders of their household. They still are soldiers in their community, and they're required to share that information, which they do,
You know, basic banking knowledge is so critical, and we should never underestimate its importance.
That's true. Basic financial knowledge is important. How to save money, how to spend money, proper use of credit, and then obviously, banking, basic knowledge as to how to interact with a bank. Many people on the lower income rungs of life are afraid to go into banks. They're intimidated by banks. Some banks have those big stone columns outside and people that don't look like us in suits and ties, and many people are intimidated because they don't have the knowledge about how to approach the system. And what we try to teach them is the system is really very personal.
You know, when someone leaves incarceration, Ms. Boles, are some of the practical barriers, some of the things they immediately encounter, and what can we do as everyday people to sort of, you're not going to ever eliminate it, but be also someone who can reinforce their value and they still have an opportunity to contribute.
So I really believe that it's just meeting a person where they are, right? Without the stigmas, addressing the fact that everyone deserves a second chance, right? If you think about it, if any of us had to really walk around and advertise the worst thing that we've ever done and be treated accordingly, that would be difficult, right? And so second chances are important. I think we still have to advocate for employment. I think we have to advocate for affordable living. We have to advocate for mental health. We have to advocate for activities within the communities, the void of activities in the communities, all of the things that can be barriers and that have contributed to them landing there. I think that's our collective responsibility.
Let me just add to that we have to change our mindset. Because the way society looks at former inmates and inmates is not very flattering. And so we need to look at these people as people, as individuals, just like we are. Many of them made some bad choices. Many of them were introduced into this world into a bad situation. They didn't have mentors. They didn't have people to educate them, and society kind of pushed them aside. And so I think we have to look at the potential that they have. And there's a lot of potential behind the walls. We've run into people that have started businesses, written books, poetry, artists, all kinds of things, have continued their education. And I think if given a chance, they can be very successful.
Doyle is saying something very deep here, because he's actually speaking to employers that sometimes can have a stigma about hiring someone coming out of prison. And how do we overcome this? It's interesting because I buried this, long ago in my life. I had someone who took care of things for me and worked with me, but he had been out of prison. He had murdered someone. He served his time, kind of out of prison in their 50s. And they always live with that guilt. They already feel as though they never get over. Once they get more clarity, they realize that these things that should never happen may have come from a bad child. It may have been something where they just lost their temper, but they carry such a burden about this. I've known it firsthand. How do we understand the importance of giving them not a second chance, but they paid their dues. They've served their time. It's not a second chance.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, you paid your dues.
Exactly.
Yes. We got to teach them forgiveness.
They paid the price.
Right.
That we forgive them.
That's what God would expect of us.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But that's not their problem. It becomes their problem. But those of us that are interacting with them, right? The community has to welcome them differently, has to see them differently. So I think there's opportunity for us to do things different.
Your voice, your future, industrial bank. Isn't this just fascinating? It really is. I'm being impacted, okay? I'll leave it at that. But we'll be back. Don't go away.
I signed up for the program because I wanted to hopefully be able to transition into society with a couple pointers I got from what I learned in the program about credit.
We will see our community that has never been justice exposed not be. And those that come home will never go back, and they'll come and they'll teach their families a different way.
I think just giving their time when they can be anywhere doing anything else to further the bank, I think highly of them for that.
How do you balance accountability with crimes committed with the compassion and the heart that we should not be judged by our worst moment, nor our best moment, but by our entire body of work?
Well, you know, I think the spirit of forgiveness has to operate in all of us. You know, people have done a number of different things. I think Jacquie said it before. If we had to be judged on the worst thing we've ever done, and then everyone knows it, you know, how would they treat us? You know, we just have to get past it. And as I said during the break, once you meet these people and you talk to them, you realize how many similarities that we have. You know, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And you've got to give people a second chance. And when you give them a second chance and you reach out to them and you give them your love, your hand, and
well,
some
it's about
education.
redemption.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about the Jeep curriculum.
Sure. So we actually, it's a 7-series session. We have a cohort, and we start out with the intro to banking. We give a little history about the bank, getting to meet them, you know, the basic banking. Then our second session is the importance of savings and why do we save and strategies for saving and the importance of saving. And then we cover credit, understanding, managing, and leveraging credit. And then we take a break from finances and we have effective communication, conflict mitigation, and they really share some of their strategies that they leverage living in such a carceral space. And then we have actually Mr. Mitchell's sister, Patricia, comes in and she teaches about purchasing real estate and home ownership. And then we have a graduation. We cook and we celebrate and we give certificates. And like Mr. Mitchell said, you know, for many of them, it's the first time that they've seen their name printed on anything positive. And people clap. And we had one individual say that because of that, yes, I think I could get my GED. So that hope and those immeasurable moments of impact really, really are just something to celebrate.
How do you choose your applicants?
Jacquie?
Yeah, the institution does. The institution does. And so we're in so many different states.
Is there
right
something
now
that you're looking for in the applicant?
Those that want to be there. Those that want to be there. And I'll tell you, our very first group in DC jail were young men emerging. Why and me? And so those individuals displayed certain behaviors. They were in other programs, and so there are certain aspects. But normally we show up wherever the Department of Corrections asks us to be.
Sometimes it's a pre-release program.
Pre-release program, absolutely.
I'm interested in how you have evolved over 10 years. What you've learned that you've had to make adjustments in this curriculum over the last 10 years.
You know what? To be honest, what I've learned is that principles of banking, principles of finance are relevant no matter who you're speaking to and in what space. We've changed a little bit of the way that we deliver it. We use different examples. For instance, commissary. How do you manage commissary? What are your needs versus your wants in an institution versus on the outside? But at the end of the day, the relationship with money, from understanding banking to the understanding the importance of savings, I think it's relevant in no matter what space.
Now, I'm assuming that many of these people are literate. That's not an issue, is it?
It can be.
Talk about that.
It can be.
Because that's a barrier that you have to overcome.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you can't have shame. And a lot of people, I realize, are illiterate, and they don't want, and they try to play as if they're disengaged, they're wondering, but they have something they're hiding, a dark secret. And that is something that's very traumatic for them to eventually share.
Absolutely.
How do you get over
So we learned that. Early on in the stages, we would give out documents and activities and worksheets, and we could realize as we were walking around the unit that some were choosing not to participate. And then we went back and we realized that they really weren't literate. So the way that we deliver the information is different now. We don't give out pieces of paper with the way that we deliver the information actually.
But you don't lower your
overcomes that.
standards.
No, we do not. No, we do not.
You just accommodate.
We accommodate where the opportunities are.
You don't want people to check out
That's right.
because they don't have a certain level of knowledge.
You know, many people don't realize that identity theft can destroy years of progress. Why is identity protection becoming so increasingly important in banking?
I sigh because it's a daily battle.
Yeah.
It's a daily battle for the bank. It's a daily battle for our customers. And, you know, the consequences and the time and the money lost because of identity theft is significant, and it continues to grow. So you always have to be on guard about your identity. You can't trust those emails you thought you used to be able to trust. Our elder customers have to be wary of who's calling them during the day, offering, you know, something that sounds like gold.
And they definitely don't want to give out their date of birth and social security number.
Yeah, but you know what's happening now? The criminals are busy. You'll look at your phone and it'll say your bank name and it'll be your bank number, and then the individual on the phone will say, we need your user ID and your password so that we can stop the crime that's in right? And they're giving their information. So, you know, our seniors are so vulnerable because they're so crafty. They're so crafty, and we spend a lot of time.
You know, Doyle, you know, you and I have known each other a very long time as well as you. Home ownership, owning real estate, has always been a pathway towards wealth building. Does that still matter as much today?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, most Americans build their wealth through home ownership. And then, you know, I guess the next group would be those that own businesses. But the average American, if he's going to build wealth, he or she's going to build wealth, it's because of home ownership. And that's why we teach it so much. And it's why we also like to deal with first-time home buyers, is because we want to get people off of the rent rolls and into homes that provides another level of stability as well, which is very important.
You know, the partnerships between banks, communities, organizations, and local leaders are so critical.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, we can't do it ourselves, right? The bank can't be the only one at the table. And so specifically when we're working with the justice exposed population, we have the motor vehicles there to help them to get their ID. We have mental health services to help them to navigate those challenges. We even have family reunification organizations that help them to reunify, right? And to rediscover their role now in their household. So it really is a collaborative effort of so many different organizations and entities that help these individuals, 10,000 coming home daily across the nation. How do they reintegrate successfully?
You know, what's fascinating, you know, we always, even in this discussion today, we talk about the stigma surrounding people coming out of prison. But there's a certain instinct, a certain work ethic, a certain discipline, a certain fearlessness, and a certain courage that they bring to wherever they go. There are some things that they have that are just remarkable.
They you know, they have some fascinating human qualities to them, and the key is just to get to use them in positive ways.
How you know, what I think is important is that God gives us all gifts.
Yes.
And we have to figure out what it is we're really good at it and master it. And I think coming out of prison, you know, I think people are so focused on wanting, because they feel like they lost so much time. They really want to make a difference. They really want to make a contribution. Talk about that and how that plays into your program.
Well, the first thing, let me just say very quickly, is they've had time.
Yes.
To discover, they've had time to be creative and to master what it is that they love. So they come with the fire, the determination, you know, oftentimes even a business plan, you know, because they've had time to really craft it and refine it. And so that's what I see, you know, from those individuals that we interact with.
How do you break generational habits and cycles? How do you break them?
Education.
Education.
First of all, education. And then I think, you know, letting somebody know that they are worthy, that they can be successful, giving them, you know, not false encouragement, but sincere encouragement that you can do this, you can be that, you know, and speaking life into them, you know, rather than darkness. And letting them know that we're here for you, you know. Who would think that bankers care about, you know, individuals that are in prison? Well, we do. We are. And, you know, I think that gives them like, wow, maybe I'm not as bad as my teacher told me I was. Or maybe a relative told me that I was. And maybe I really can do this, you know?
You know, one of the things we hear about people in prison is how quickly they find God. They read the Bible, they educate themselves. So obviously, moral clarity, understanding that in whatever you do in life, because it's something my parents taught me, they said always be legal, ethical, and moral in whatever you do. Don't get caught up in short-term gain. Build something not just for a lifetime, but for generations to come. I do think that everything comes down to values and the things that you value. And once you spend time in prison and you get your freedom back, because you realize just what a gift that was, what you value is something that's remarkable. I'm more interested now in what many of the people that you come and some stories that you can tell over the last 10 years that is just, because this has to make you feel good at night. Oh, it has to give you such joy. As they say, joy of coming in the morning. It has to do something for the soul.
It does.
It feeds it.
And you see them. They come out powerful.
Yeah.
And they are determined to, number one, themselves, stop others from crossing the thresholds that they've crossed, right? They're the cheat sheet for life now for our youth. And they're out there in the communities. They're leading TED Talks. They're, you know, they're in schools. They're in schools talking about what their journeys were to our youth.
Examples.
And so, oh, goodness. Examples. I don't even know if I can name some individuals, but Halim Flowers was one of our first students. And he has come out and he's done monumental things. He's done artistry. He's sold artistry. We have some of his art hanging in our building. Joel Castone, the first ANC commissioner elected to that position while he was incarcerated, has started an organization and is working with hundreds of individuals across the DMV area. So we have countless stories of individuals where we've seen them serve decades, go in as children, come out in their mid-30s and just take off, and they're pillars in our community, and I'm so proud of them.
Well, the good news is that you are doing your job. It's up to us who are employers and people watching the program tonight that we've got to give them not just a chance, we got to give them more than an opportunity. We've got to give them a chance to just thrive again and give back in ways that they never could before. You know, I cannot thank you all enough for this, because this is really what life is about.
You know, I'll just say this before we close. I think anybody that has done this with Industrial Bank, including myself, has found it the most fulfilling thing we've ever done in our professional careers.
Yeah, and you know what? Just sitting here listening to the story and feeling your spirit and the satisfaction that you get from this, I mean, I understand. Congratulations. I'm glad we had a chance to sit down and talk about this. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Oh, when we come back, Sean Spicer's on to talk about Trump 2.0. Don't go away. We welcome Sean Spicer to our broadcast house, Your Voice, Your Future. Welcome to the show. You know, you called this Trump 2.0. What was the biggest failure of Trump 1.0 that forced this evolution?
I don't think it was a failure as much as there was a belief that the people who served in the first Trump administration actually had the president's best interest at heart, and that clearly wasn't the case in a number of instances. We had several people who joined the administration to either serve their own interests or, frankly, to undermine the president's agenda. And I think, Armstrong, one of the points that I make, I mean, frankly, not the point, but the central premise to the book is that while almost all presidents except one, when they have 2 terms, are sequential, the 4 years out of office are what gave this president the ability to plan and plot his return in a way that I think is going to be historic.
Well, has Trump, Sean, transformed the GOP permanently or merely made it dependent on one man?
That's such a great question. I think in a lot of ways it's permanently because, frankly, Armstrong, and I know you and I have gone around a long time and seen a lot of iterations in the party, a lot of people come and go. But I think fundamentally one of the things that Trump has done for the conservative movement is teach us how to fight. I know in my own personal experiences, we were kind of told, make your case and then sit down and be quiet. And I think Trump has shown us, whether it's culture or policy, domestic policy or foreign policy, that we can speak up, we can demand a seat at the table, and that there are a lot more of us than we think of. And so I think part of what he has shown us is that we should be very active, very outspoken, and to move the agenda forward.
You argued the bureaucracy resisted Trump the first time. At what point does reform become consolidation of power, Sean?
Another great question. I think part of it was this understanding, right? I always tell people, during the first term, there were plenty of instances where we would get pushback and say, oh, you can't do that. That's not the way it works. It's never done that way. And in large part, we accepted that as, okay, well, we can't do it. I think what Trump in particular has learned as a president and those around him is challenging the status quo is part of the mandate, that accepting mediocrity is not acceptable. And so you've seen a lot of the challenge. I mean, again, you think about NATO. For decades, literally decades, we allowed all of these countries in Europe who had made a commitment to spend 2% of their own national defense as part of their NATO commitment to get away with not doing it because they thought, well, the United States will do that. In the case of trade, I was the assistant U.S. trade rep. We had frankly become accustomed to the fact that other countries could have access to our country. Our ranchers, our farmers, our service providers, though, were not given equal access to their countries. President Trump has turned the table on all that. And then you look at the Maha movement, he literally flipped the food pyramid upside down.
Is America becoming stronger through nationalism or more isolated from the world? Because does constant political warfare eventually exhaust a nation psychologically and spiritually?
I think it can if it's for the wrong reasons. But let me just, go back to the first 2 reasons that I cited. Holding someone to their own commitment, which was the case of NATO. Remember, part of their Article 5 commitment was that everybody agreed that they would spend 2% on their own national defense. That made sense. It was the idea that we are collectively stronger if we each build up our own national defense capabilities. And yet Europe said, nope, we're just not going to do it. We'll let the United States do it. We'll spend our money on social programs, on roads and bridges, et cetera. The United States can spend all their money on the military, and they'll take care of us. And then on trade, the same thing. I think holding people accountable is vastly different than sort of trying to gain the upper hand, if you will. And all we've asked for as a country is fairness and parity, which, and frankly, in the case of NATO, is living up to their own commitments. Those are things they said they would do as a member state of NATO.
Trump supporters say institutions, Sean, were already broken. Critics say Trump is breaking them further. Who's right?
It might be a little of both, because there's the funny part about this is I can't name an institution, within government that is working really well, meaning that there can't be additional reforms. The example that I loved in the book that Elon Musk exposed is there is a limit to the number of federal employees that can retire on any given day because we have a pulley system in Pennsylvania that leads to a limestone mine where the records are kept. I mean, how absurd is that? And yet we have allowed that to go on for decades because, well, it just one administration comes and goes and does nothing about it. So I think that challenging institutions to be better, more effective, and when it comes to their mission is actually a good and healthy thing. The notion that somehow you have to just keep an institution in place is ridiculous. I think there isn't a single institution, no business would ever operate like this, right? To say, okay, we're just going to keep doing exactly what we do. You're constantly looking to be better, to serve your customers better, to make a better product, to become more efficient. And I think that we should ask the same of our government leaders.
Has social media, Sean, made governing nearly impossible because outrage now moves faster than facts? And is the real political divide today ideological or between working Americans and elite institutions?
Man, you're on a roll. That's actually a great question. I just had Scott Rasmussen on my show, and he identified the fact that truly there is this divide among elites, which he categorizes by three different distinct things: income, opportunity, and location. And I think that there is a bit of that. There is a difference. But to the first part of your question, social media has definitely divided us further as a country, and it's made our politics more different. There's this sense of outrage that you can just tweet when you're upset about something without going off half-cocked. And as an Irishman, I appreciate that to some extent. But it's not necessarily healthy. It's like, shoot first, aim later. And too many times I think that we just hear something, we tweet something off or we post something, and then we find out additional context afterwards. And especially when it comes to our leaders, I think it's becoming harder and harder to get people who want to serve because they realize that there's no thanks to it. You get hit from both sides. You get hit from the left if you're a Republican, and then you get hit from the far right if you're trying to just govern. And the same thing is true with Democrats. They're getting both sides. The right is hitting them, and then their own party.
So, Sean, this is the question. Can our great nation remain the world's moral leader while becoming increasingly transactional abroad?
Well, I'm not. Transactional is a very interesting choice of words because I don't know that we've ended this notion that you can take advantage of the United States, that we're just this dumping ground for everybody who wants to come here and do business, and we get screwed otherwise. So I don't know that it's transactional. I think, frankly, any good friend would say, that there's a give and take in any good relationship. That being said, I do think as we begin to celebrate in earnest our 250th anniversary, there is a moment in which we need to reflect. I personally think this country is absolutely amazing. It's the best place on earth to live. And that we need to renew that spirit of freedom, of capitalism, of entrepreneurial spirit that brought our founders to fight for our freedom in the first place. So I think it's, to be honest, I know you're asking an international question, but I think the greater question, Armstrong, is do we as a country, I see these polls where many young people in particular question the efficacy of our how we govern ourselves. And that's a pity because we are an unbelievably blessed and amazing nation that others strive to get into. And I hope and wish the next generation of Americans is able to recognize that and appreciate that and want to support and cherish that.
Sean Spicer was a communications director at the Republican National Committee, and he later served as the press secretary for Donald Trump and communications director. I think it was in 2017. Always a professional, always dignity and integrity. I know we're out of time. I'm going to ask you this. What worries you most in 30 seconds as we go forward?
I don't know. This is probably the best interview I've ever done, Armstrong. Your questions are great. What worries me is not understanding what the future holds. I think China poses an enormous threat to us. I think our own debt poses a massive threat to us. And I think that we've become so we've so focused on living from soundbite to soundbite.
Sean, I'm out of time. Where can he buy the book? They've got to go out and buy 2.0. Where? You have 10 seconds, man.
Amazon.com or go to SeanSpicer.com. Either one, we've got links to it all. Thank you, Armstrong.
Thank you so much for joining us. God bless you and your family. Thank you for joining us for this edition and all our guests. I'm Armstrong Williams.